It looks like we have everyone. So I will call to order the Finance Committee meeting of Monday, April 24th, 2023, and ask Dave to please call the roll.
Council President Curry.
Here.
Alder Vitiver.
Present.
Alder Evers.
Here.
Alder Madison.
Here.
Alder Rummel.
Present.
Mary of Quorum.
Thank you.
Mayor, this is Mike Verveer. I'm present as well, but off camera because I'm traveling.
Oh, thank you, Alder Verveer. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. So I don't believe we have any regular public comment. I'm just reloading to make sure. So we'll move on to disclosures and recusals. Are there any disclosures or recusals on today's agenda? Seeing none. We'll move on to the consent agenda. I'll note that items 21 and 22 are discussion items, so we will separate them from the consent agenda. Are there other items that alders would like to have separated from the consent agenda? Alder Rummel.
Number 16.
Number 16. All right. Are there any other items? President Curry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Agenda item 20, please.
Item 20. All right. Are there any other items that alders would like to have excluded from the consent agenda? Seeing none, then we will be excluding 16, 20, 21, and 22. President Curry, a motion?
Move to approve consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's moved and second to approve the consent agenda with the recommendations therein, except for items 16, 20, 21, and 22. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of the consent agenda?
Madam
Curry?
Mayor. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Can I rescind my request to remove agenda item 20?
You may. All right. So unless there's objection, we'll be removing items 16, 21, and 22 from the consent agenda. Seeing no objection, then the motion is to adopt the consent agenda recommendations and to exclude items 16, 21, and 22. Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor, and we will come to item 16, which is Legistar 77188, extending the life of TID 39 for 12 months for the purposes of the creation of affordable housing and improving city housing stock in the city of Madison. President Curry, a motion?
Move to adopt.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt. Alder Rummel, you had questions?
I have a question, a technical question and a policy question. When I looked at the budget last year, this TID looked like it was going out for 5 years. And I'm just wondering if that's the normal kind of process. And then, alders in conjunction with staff and the mayor decide to end it. That's the first question.
We have Matt McLajeski here.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Alder Rummel. That really was just an error on our part last year when we prepared the SIP. We probably should not have had that going out for 5 additional years.
Okay.
Matt, do you want to just for the benefit of newer members talk about when TIDs close, or what are the circumstances that cause TIDs to close?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. So in the case of this TID will be under state law. Its expenditure period will end this September. Whenever you set up a TID district, there's state law that governs how long you can spend the funds and then how long you can keep the district open. And in this case, that date, our maximum date for which we can spend funds will be this September. The TID has repaid all of its debt, so therefore we propose to close it down. However, under state law, you are allowed to, upon closing a TID, capture an additional year of increment to use for affordable housing. And that's what this resolution is before you. It's a recognition that we'll be closing the TID, but it's a request to seek the council's approval to collect an additional year's worth of increment for affordable housing. In the case of this TID, that will be about $3.5 million. And what would happen is we would collect that increment for another year, and it would be deposited in the Affordable Housing Fund.
Thanks, Matt. Alder Rummel, you had another question?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I know that Matt's team and the Economic Development Committee are working on looking at our TIF policy. And my question is, how can the Finance Committee participate in that process in a more formal way to get updates or whatever ideas you have? Thank you.
Matt?
Sure. Thank you, Alder Rummel. So we have not started the process of taking a refresh look at the TIF policy. It is in our work plan to start that work in the second half of this year. And I suspect that the Finance Committee will be intimately involved in those discussions. Likely the first step that we're going to take is we're going to put together, for lack of a better term, a project charter that will outline our goals for the effort, who will be involved, and sort of the timeline and schedule for proceeding. And that will be coming to the mayor and the council again, likely late summer.
Thank you, Matt. Are there other questions on item 16? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 16. We'll move on to item 21, which is Legistar 74785, discussion on the meeting format for the 2023 Finance Committee. And so let me just sort of set the stage here. The Finance Committee has been meeting virtually through the pandemic, and we have been checking in every several months on our collective desire to maintain a virtual meeting format or to move back to in-person. At this point in time, I believe that the only room that is set up to do a hybrid meeting is the council chambers. And it does require, obviously, the staffing to do that. This is just an open discussion about what people would like to see. If somebody is moved to make a motion, you can do that. But we would like to get a sense of what the body would like to do going forward so that staff can plan. Are there questions, thoughts, desires to go back in person, to remain virtual? Alder Evers?
Thank you, Mayor. I have consented and agreed to in-person meetings with council. I think it's important for the colleagues, for us to get together and work together and have that, hopefully, a higher level of mutual understanding and collegiality. I think that there is a certain level of convenience to the BCCs continuing to meet on a virtual basis. I think it's convenient for staff, is convenient for the public, or either offering public comment or listening in and watching the meeting. So my preference would be that we maintain the virtual format. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Anyone else? Alder Vitever.
So I'll float what I suggested, I think a year ago, which was that we continue virtual for standard meetings, but that we come in person for budget deliberations.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Rommel.
I kind of meant to give a thumbs up to Alder Vitever, but I kind of like the idea of hybrid, but then there's the actuality that Plan Commission meets the same night, so we would have to consider rearranging our schedule. But I think Alder Vitever's point is good. I know I've gained a lot from being in those big meetings with all the staff and listening in the PowerPoints. I think it's really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Madison.
I just wanted to also thumb up what Alder Vitever shared, because I think, especially being new on the committee, I could benefit from the budget deliberations being in person.
President Curry.
I would be willing to offer a motion because I also echo Alder Vitever's. All right, so move to conduct the 2023 Finance Committee virtually, with the exception of budget deliberations, which I should have clarified, hybrid or in person exclusively.
I think we only have the option for in person.
Okay.
Unless we can figure out the schedule
Yes.
and do it in chambers, which we'd have to check for conflicts.
Okay. So,
but I should note that, and I don't know if there are IT staff on the line, but what we previously, even if we were in person without a hybrid option, the meetings were broadcast.
Right.
So they're still accessible for people to watch.
That's correct.
Thank you.
would you like me to restate the motion?
I think we've got the gist of it. So
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Alder. So I think the question that I'm sure staff will have almost immediately is which budget meetings? And so certainly the way that you phrase it for budget deliberations, that would be the meetings where the Finance Committee is actually taking amendments, discussing those amendments, and then voting on the budgets. It would not mean the presentations from agencies. And so just maybe, Dave, do you want to sort of walk through? We have a bunch of different budget meetings, or Christine, if you want to talk about the different budget meetings.
Sure. So in September, we'll have 2 days of budget hearings from agencies. So that would be on the capital budget. Christine's putting up the dates right now. So you can see those briefings, September 11th and 12th and October 9th and 10th. And then the amendment meetings, September 26th and October 23rd.
So that now that we have a sense of what we're actually looking at, is the will of the body to have those September 26th and October 23rd meetings in person? That's what I'm getting. All right. So if that's the understanding of the motion, then that the Finance Committee would meet virtually, except for our meetings on September 26th and October 23rd. It's been moved and seconded. Is there further conversation? Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Seeing none. We'll ask staff to implement that. And we'll move on to item 22, which is Legistar 77430, the 2024 budget calendar and process overview, which we jumped the gun a tiny bit on. But Christine, am I turning this over to you?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christine Coe. I'm the city's budget manager, and Dave and I will be co-presenting some slides that I sent just an hour or so ago. So we'll give a general overview of the budget timeline. We'll talk a bit about the budget resources, and I'll show you how to find budget materials online. And Dave will talk a bit about the structural deficit and limitations of the capital and operating budgets. So just as a reminder, the city does have two budgets. We have a capital budget that funds infrastructure like roads, bike lanes, affordable housing. And we have the operating budget that focuses on the day-to-day operations of the city, including primarily staffing costs, keeping libraries open, and services like recycling and trash pickup. Both of the budgets cover 1 year, so they go from January 1st through December 1st, and they're authorized by the council and how the city plans to expend funds in the upcoming year. The capital budget is primarily paid through borrowing. You'll see the term general obligation borrowing throughout the capital budget, and that's when the city takes out money that we repay over time, which shows up as debt service. And then the operating budget is primarily paid through property taxes, as well as user fees and federal and state aid. At a very high level, we're working on the budget for most of the year leading up to the year that the budget is implemented. So the first quarter, we really focus on what we call cost to continue, which is planning for how much it would cost to provide the same level of services in the upcoming year. We're currently in the second phase where agencies have submitted their capital budgets and will also be releasing the operating budget process requests soon. July and August are focused on developing the executive budget, which are presented to the Common Council and Finance Committee in September and October. And throughout the year, there's public participation in several ways. City staff are hearing about resident priorities through regular planning meetings. Neighborhood resource teams submit ideas for the budget, and we formally and informally incorporate this in the different phases of the budget, as well as having the opportunity to provide public testimony at the hearings in the fall. So this is a slide that I shared earlier in the discussion about meeting format. On the capital side, we released the budget guidance and started the agency request process on March 21st, and agencies submitted last Friday. And the budget team is currently reviewing all of the requests, and we'll have that posted online in about a week or so. In mid-May, all of the agencies will present their budget to the mayor's office, and there will be a series of deliberation meetings to develop the executive budget, which will be released to the council on September 5th. And there will be 2 finance committee meetings where all of the agencies present their budgets to all of you. The first meeting on the 11th will start with regular business, followed by briefings. And then the meeting on the 12th will just be a continuation of the briefings. You all will have a week to submit your ideas for amendments. And the September 26th meeting, which will be in person, will be the deliberation and votes on the amendments. On the operating side, we'll be kicking off agency requests on June 20th. Agencies will have 5 weeks and will submit their requests by July 21st. And following a similar pattern as Capital, we'll have a 2-week briefing period with the mayor's office. There will be some decision meetings to develop the executive budget that's going to be released on October 3rd. And there will be, 2 meetings at Finance Committee that are focused on briefings, a week for amendments, and amendment votes on October 23rd. And then the whole council will have an opportunity to make another pass of amendments at the end of October into early November, And there will be up to 3 common council meetings, November 14th, 15th, and 16th to adopt the budget. I'm just taking a closer look at the amendment deadlines. Again, as I mentioned, there's the introduction of the budget. The following week, there are the Finance Committee hearings. And then during the amendment week, we ask alders to submit their ideas as early as possible to let us know what you're thinking, and we can provide support in developing cost elements or cost estimates or coordinating with agency staff. So for both the capital and operating, there will be a week after the briefings where you can submit your ideas to us. We ask that alders submit by the Wednesday prior to the Finance Committee meeting to give us a little bit of time to compile all of the analysis and publish it on our website by Friday. And then the meeting to deliberate on amendments will be the following day. On the capital side, we're meeting on a Tuesday due to a holiday, and on operating, we're meeting the following Monday. And the council amendment schedule is similar, where there will be a little over a week for any alder to submit amendment ideas. We have a Wednesday deadline, so we can publish on Friday. So I'm just going to turn to a couple of our key resources online. cityofmadison.com/finance/budget is our main page, where we have all of our, where you can get all of the agency materials, look up past budgets. The mayor's message for the 24 capital budget has been posted for the last few weeks, as well as a kickoff presentation. If you're interested in looking at what's in the current budget, you can still find that, as well as I think the last 5 or 6 years are still posted online. And if you ever needed something before then, you can always reach out and we'll find that for you. I highly recommend starting with the agency highlights page. Each agency has its own section that's sorted alphabetically, and we highlight major changes, including whether if there are no changes, we'll say there are no changes compared to the prior year, but that's really the best starting point for understanding what's in any agency's budget. And we also have executive summaries for both the capital and operating budget. And although these reflect the executive budget, not the adopted budget, it also provides I always recommend these as a starting points for understanding what is in the budget, since it covers most of what's in adopted. And the last thing I will mention is if you have any questions relating to the budget, you can always reach out to me directly. That's ckoh@cityofmadison.com. And I'm also happy to say that we are fully staffed with 4 analysts. And so we have updated our employee in that page with the new analyst contact information and portfolios. So if you had a question about the specific agency, you can find that on EmployeeNet. So I'm going to just briefly walk through our budget webpage. So you'll see up top, we're actually going to be refreshing all of this in a week as soon as we have the capital requests ready to publish. So it's going to be a little bit different in just a few days. But right now for the 24 budget, we have the budget calendar and mayor's message for capital up top. And then we have all of our 23 budget materials. So next week, all of these dates will reflect the 24 budget dates. So you'll be able to click into the agency request from here. And also, if you scroll down, you'll see the 22 adopted budget. We'll move all the 23 materials down here, and you can find all of a number of past budgets. So next week, when the capital budget requests are available, you can click on capital agency requests. And it will be organized like this, where you can browse all requests, or you can look by agency. We've changed our forms a bit this year, so it won't look exactly the same, but everything will have a similar format, where if you open an agency budget, you'll see a summary page, a transmittal memo from the department that explains the goals and priorities of the budget request. And you'll see a proposal form for each of the projects or programs in the budget that will have have a project description. It'll talk about how the project is aligned with citywide priorities, how it advances racial equity and social justice and climate resilience goals, as well as a detailed budget breakdown. And as I mentioned, in the executive budget, you'll see these executive budget summaries for both capital and operating. And if you have any questions about what's in this current year's budget, like I said, this is the place where I'd recommend starting. And you can always reach out to myself, and agency staff also are probably the best resources on their own budgets. And they produce those short budget videos as part of the Alder onboarding. So with that, I'm going to go back to the presentation and I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Thanks, Christine. So some of the key issues that we have to take into account when we're putting together the budget is really that outlook of what we call the structural deficit, meaning that our costs grow faster than our revenues. And that's been the case for a number of years now. We'll get into some details why that is the case. But we try to model out a 5-year period. And, the biggest component of our costs are paying our employees who deliver the services that residents expect every day. And so we project what we think wage growth will be. We're a city that's growing, so we expect to have to add services and people to provide those services, so positions will grow. Part of paying and providing compensation to city staff include fringe benefits such as health insurance, the Wisconsin retirement system, or their pensions. Those costs go up every year. But we're really constrained on the revenue side by state law, and primarily what's called the levy limit. And that limit can only increase by really the value of the amount of new construction that we have in the city each year divided by the total property value in the city. So it's a pretty relatively small number compared to our costs, about 2% annually. And then we have costs for fleet, utilities, and then our debt service increases each year based on what is happening in our capital improvement plan, or SIP as we call it. So this 5-year outlook is we'll see smaller deficits in the short term because we still have one-time monies available from both the American Rescue Plan Act as well as closure of some large TIDs. But once those one-time monies go away, that deficit will grow to over $30 million by 2027. And so all that has to be kept in mind as we're looking at both revenues and how to grow revenues in different ways, as well as the level of expenditures, service levels, and things like that. Next slide. So some of those underlying factors, much of this comes down to state law and the actions of the state legislature. We in Madison and cities throughout Wisconsin do not really have a broad array of general revenue sources. We're heavily reliant on the property tax, and we do not have a sales tax, for example. Counties, most counties in Wisconsin do have a sales tax, a half-cent sales tax option, and most counties have exercised that option. Cities do not have that. We're also within that property tax amount. Almost 2/3 of property taxes are collected from residences in the city, as opposed to commercial property and businesses and so on. Again, that's factors associated with both state law and the Wisconsin Constitution. I mentioned the levy limit. It does not allow us to grow those property tax revenues at the same pace of our costs. And then another major element of the city's revenue stream for it to pay for its services is state aid, particularly what's called shared revenue, where the state shares its revenue from income and sales taxes with local governments. That category of aid has decreased by $100 million over the past 20 years. So not only has it not grown with inflation, it's actually gone down. And then as an example of what the state legislature can do specifically to Madison, it cuts the city's transit aid in half on a one-time basis in the last budget, primarily in response to all the federal pandemic aid that was received by the transit system. On the other side of the ledger, our costs are going up. As I mentioned, we have population growth that we have to respond to. That drives community services needs, bus routes, library branches, our public health services, safety services, and so on. And much of what we do in the operating budget is really paying for city staff who deliver those services. So it's almost 2/3 of the budget paying our city staff to deliver those services, both the salaries they received and the benefits they receive. And so cost drivers there, of course, trying to be competitive in what is currently a very competitive labor environment, rising benefit costs, as well as the costs of the personnel in those nonprofit organizations that deliver services under contract on the city's behalf. So on the operating side, as I mentioned, we're heavily reliant on the property tax. About 3/4 of the city's general fund budget is paid for through the property tax levy. We have almost no other general revenue options under state law, and even the limited or the focused revenue options are also very limited. State aid has been actually, as I said, declining. It's a declining share of the city's budget. And we have limits on how much we can increase both property taxes and the amount of spending that the city can have. And that's tied to about $7 million of state aid that the city receives under this expenditure restraint program. We, of course, have to have a balanced budget. We're not like the federal budget where we can spend more than we take in and then borrow the rest for operating costs. We can't do that. And so we have to have a balanced budget each year. And then we've seen our capital budget increase pretty significantly over the last decade plus as we're replacing aging infrastructure as well as responding to growth in the city's population and service expectations and so on. And so we have to pay that debt back to pay for that capital budget. And so debt service has become a larger and larger share of the city's budget. So these levy limits I talked about, they've been in the form that that we currently deal with for about 12 years. So since 2012, the city has engaged each year in a number of different strategies to try to either change our costs in a certain way or increase revenues, whether it's increasing the room tax rate, increasing our ambulance fees to pay for example, in a recent budget for an additional ambulance on the southeast side, the institution of a vehicle registration fee, which is one of the very few broad-based revenue sources allowed under state law that was put into place in 2020. And most recently, in response to the economic effects of the pandemic, the American Rescue Plan Act and other federal economic recovery funding has also helped the city's budget. We've also put into place special charges, including the urban forestry special charge, which started in 2014, and most recently the resource recovery special charge in 2022. So all of these sort of strategies have been used over the past 12 years, and we'll have to continue to find other strategies to keep revenues increasing as much as we can to keep pace with those costs. On the capital side, there are not the level of restrictions that we see on the operating side under state law. There is a constitutional limit on the Wisconsin Constitution. Our total debt cannot exceed 5% of our equalized property value in the city. Right now, we're at about 1.7% of that value, and we have about $600 million of general obligation debt outstanding. So that's one measure. As you can see, we're not too close. We're not close at all to that limitation. We also have the highest bond rating allowable, AAA, and that ensures the lowest possible interest costs for the city. And so one element of that bond rating is the level of debt that we have, the amount of debt service. Are we able to repay that debt service? And so we have to be mindful of that. What is that debt service share of the operating budget when we think about the level of debt authorized in the capital budget? And so the 2024 budget, the guidance provided to agencies by the mayor focused for those reasons on fiscal responsibility, trying to find sources other than the city property tax, including federal funding for projects, and then focusing on maintaining our current infrastructure. All right, those are some of the issues you'll all be facing as we develop the 2024 capital and operating budgets. I think we'd both be happy to answer any questions you might have, Mayor.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Christine. Questions, Alder Evers.
Thank you, Mayor. Dave, you mentioned something about despite all the new construction, that the term, I think, increase in equalized value, which is in the denominator apparently. So does that say that even if we have all this new construction, if the overall increase in property values rises to a certain point, it undermines the benefit of all that new construction? Is that the right way of understanding that?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, it's a calculation and it is a ratio. So, I think in the assessor's office most recent report, which just came out, I think we had the highest total dollar amount of new construction ever in the city. But we also had a very large increase in the overall property value in the city. And so, you put those two numbers together, and our net new construction percentage, which is used in the levy limit, is still a little more than 2%. And we'll probably never return to some of the numbers we saw probably 20 years ago, where we were above 3%, just because our overall tax base is increasing so much. And so if you think about it, just those valuation changes, so not looking at the construction at all, but just residential property values going up as much as they have, that does tend to dilute that new construction impact.
Another way of looking at that is that Madison is a desirable place to live. We can't build housing fast enough. And even though we're building record amounts of new housing, the increase of housing values doesn't really yield the benefit we would hope it would otherwise. I guess that's just another way.
And I mean, that's one way to look at it. I would say that we are, in terms of a developed city, we do relatively well compared to other parts of the state that have to provide services and see almost no net new construction, and their levy limit amount is going up almost nothing. And so all of that has to be, I think that context is important, but I think your overall comment is correct. And I think that's some of the challenges that all cities in Wisconsin face with the levy limit.
And just a separate question, if I may, regarding interest rates. The increase in interest rates, what kind of impact does that have on our ability to pay back our debt, and is it impinging to a greater extent on our operating budget?
I would say that we have not sort of issued debt yet in this current environment. Our interest costs are higher than they have been in the past, but they remain, I would say, moderate compared to what we saw, 20, 30 years ago. It will definitely have an impact on debt service. And I think that's why, as I mentioned during the presentation, the mayor's focus on, fiscal responsibility within the capital budget, the overall level of debt and things like that. We just have to be mindful of that.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Alder Rummel.
Thank you, Mayor. What are the opportunities for increasing state aid with the state surplus, or is that just dreaming of my rose-colored glasses?
Do you want me to start, Mayor? Do you want to try?
Go ahead, Dave.
The mayor's been engaged in a number of conversations and can probably speak to this further and more than I have. But yes, the state does have a $7 billion surplus. It is at the stage in the process where the legislature's Joint Committee on Finance is beginning to review and remake the governor's budget. The governor in his budget did put in a significant shared revenue plan, which built off of recommendations from cities, towns, villages, and counties to basically allocate a portion of the state's sales tax to shared revenue, and that would allow shared revenue to grow each year. And I think we're at the stage now where how does that new money get allocated between both within the group of cities, towns, and villages, and then between each of those groups, and in terms of who benefits more than others benefit. I think the governor in his budget, and it seems the legislature has talked about this as well, will have some component in this new shared revenue that's tied to public safety and a maintenance of effort in public safety. So those are, I think, some of the features. I think compared to at any time over the past 20 plus years, we're probably on the cusp of a good, perhaps, outcome in terms of state aid to cities. And I think the other element in this is both the governor and the legislature appear to be on the same page with a total repeal of personal property taxes and backfilling that sort of lost tax base for cities, towns, villages, and counties and school districts with an aid program to support that lost tax base. So I think it's we're in a positive place right now. How it all plays out, I think in the details is yet to be seen. Mayor, I hope I didn't cover too much of that, but
no, that's you're absolutely right. I think that's a good summary. I don't know that there's a whole lot more to add, except that as you would assume, there's a lot of politics going on around and behind all of this, and I don't think that the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor's office are in agreement. The League of Wisconsin Municipalities has been involved in the conversations, and I think has been trying to represent what would be good for cities. I think and to be clear, I have not seen a proposal. That the rumors I hear about the current conversations really benefit towns more than they benefit cities. But would increase shared revenue. to cities as well. I think, for us, the personal property tax is, we're not thrilled about that going away. I think it impacts other places less. So there's a lot of, there's just a lot of different interests that are getting balanced here. But like Dave, I am hopeful that we will get something out of this conversation, which will certainly be helpful. But I don't think that we should anticipate that an increase in shared revenue is going to solve all of our problems. Other questions for Dave or Christine? Alder Vitever.
I am curious as to whether going to a 2-year budget would be helpful as opposed to a 1-year budget, particularly in terms of staff time that is assigned to developing, changing, doing all of the posting, all of that kind of stuff.
Alder Vitever, it's definitely a concept that we think about and we'll continue to think about. It is not something that we can just sort of flip a switch and put into place. There's a lot involved with moving to a 2-year budget. And, one element of which is everything we just talked about regarding the state and levy limits and how it's tied to the property tax. Those are all annual processes. And so all that has to be kind of kept in mind. But I think, we have a very full plate of just the things we're trying to get done now, like moving to, an outcome-oriented, results-oriented budget process and, doing more with equity in the budget process and things like that. But it's definitely, on that list of things that, maybe we can get there at some point over the next few years, or at least think it through. But I think it does have some positive elements to it that we could definitely, that we're definitely considering.
Alder Madison.
Thank you, Mayor. My question or questions are more around the engagement for the public on the budget process overall. And I'm just wondering if someone can just share what has it looked like outside of community members coming to, public testimony? Like what has the engagement looked like, I guess?
Christine, do you want to start and I can give a historical perspective?
Sure. So for the last 2 or 3 years, we've really been focused on doing informational sessions with the public, co-sponsored with alders, closer to when the executive budget is released. So last year we did 2 sessions. We had an open invite to all alders to share the word with their constituents and co-host the event with us. And that took place in, I think, September and October. We've had over 500 views according to the YouTube view counter, which is pretty good participation. And in the year before that, we had an East Side and a West Side alder meeting where the alders kind of got together and invited us to one of the meetings that they had already planned. So we're open to being involved in events that you all are organizing with your residents. I think in this phase of the pandemic, we'd be open to considering, in-person info sessions or other types of meeting formats. But for at least the past 2 or 3 years, it's been primarily virtual.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And Alder, just historically, I think that staff and the council have really struggled with how to best engage around the budget. I've seen 3 or 4 different versions of large public meetings, East and West, or one year we had 5 different meetings across the community. One year we did a build your own budget exercise, sort of imagining that the budget was $100 and how would you allocate the dollars and cents amongst things. One year we did a massive effort. Each agency sort of put together a board saying, here's what our top line budget number is, and here's the stuff we do with that money. And I think we've never found the thing that actually works to inform people about what's in the budget and gets good feedback back on it. The massive effort to have each agency put out some information, what we heard back from the public was, this is great. I had no idea the city did all of this. But it didn't result in suggestions of what to cut. It resulted in suggestions of what we should add, which is generally the problem when we go seeking budget feedback, is that we get a lot of requests for more services and very little suggestion about where we could cut services or find funding, which isn't surprising. It's obviously complicated, and most people don't have a deep enough understanding of the budget to make suggestions. So I think we focused more on education and then trying to listen throughout the course of the year for priorities, so that we can build those into the budget, rather than trying to focus the engagement just around the actual adoption of the budget. The other thing that happens, of course, is that there ends up being a lot of focus on the amendment process, which, of course, is good, but also is a sort of incomplete picture of the whole budget process.
And then for the East-West events and just what's been hosted, I think you say September and October, Christine, how, like the diversity of the turnout, if you can remember any of those sort of, or just the diversity of the participation in those things.
Yeah, so last year we did, we had the alders as panelists, but we were streaming and didn't have like a webinar format. So I don't think that we had a sense of who was in the room, who was like in the virtual room. And the prior years, or I think the year before, there were probably fewer than 10 people in the live sessions. We did share the recordings out after the fact, but it was pretty small. And I think most of the residents were cameras off. So I'm not sure. And we didn't do like a registration up front. So I don't know the demographics or representation there.
Okay. Well, I have lots of thoughts and about it, and I'll be on with y'all all night if y'all allow me to do it. So I'll just reach out separately outside of this about some ideas and how to talk about the budget differently. Maybe that might be helpful, especially to get the suggestions for what could be cut potentially to make it work. And if we had more, and because we have less sort of. But
I think it would be great if you want to connect directly with Christine.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Evers?
Thank you, Mayor. I have to apologize. I'm away, and they're in this for a show I have up in Wausau, and there's this timer, this motion detector, and the lighting goes off every 5 minutes. So that's why I have to get up and move. Anyways, it is foreboding thinking about the next 5 years. And apart from getting some relief and some help from the state, what is the process that is available to us to go to the voters to allow us to exceed the levy limit if push ever came to that kind of show?
So we are able, as a municipality, to go to referendum and ask for permission to exceed the levy limit. If that is what we would choose to do, I think it's a pretty substantial piece of work to do so, and that we'd want to have a pretty long time horizon if we want to head in that direction. There's obviously a number of things to take into account. What else might be on the ballot? Having an effort around that. Anyway, I think all of us have experienced the school district doing a similar thing. So I think you can learn from that, but it is an option that's available to us.
Are there any conversations, perhaps with civic leaders to think about like that kind of possibility of 3 or 4 years down the road? And perhaps pulling together what I'm saying is a more public discussion so that we would have representatives of business leaders and civic leaders, et cetera, to help us resolve this short of draconian cuts across the board.
I don't think that there have been conversations external to the city yet. I think there have been some preliminary conversations internal to the city, which is obviously where we would need to start. It is slightly delicate because there's a certain type of conversation that can happen with us as with city staff, with us as elected leaders. And then there's a conversation that is a more sort of political, electoral conversation that can't happen in these spaces. So I think we're not quite there yet in terms of having external conversations. But I think we need to have a few more internal conversations first.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Other questions for Dave or Christine? If not, thank you. And Christine did send us all the slides, so you can refer back to them, but also obviously reach out to either of them with additional questions. That is the last item on our agenda today. So President Curry, a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you much. Have a good evening, everyone.